All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries public hearing on proposals to amend fixed gear fishing rules to further protect endangered species. I'm Agency Director Dan McKiernan. I regret we're not in a large room meeting face-to-face due to the pandemic, but I'm confident we can use this virtual meeting technology to provide the presentation in a meaningful way to allow you to understand the proposals and provide comments to us. So now about today's virtual meeting. It will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. Last night's hearing was posted this morning. DMF's Jared Silva, whose voice you just heard, is the moderator of the meeting, and he will be assisting me with recognizing you when you want to speak. If you know anyone who is unable to use these technologies sufficiently, please have them reach out to us so we can get them the relevant information. Next slide, slide number 2, please. This slide describes the legal authorities for DMF to propose and take these actions and relevant timelines. The comment period will remain open through next Friday, December 18th. We anticipate making a final recommendation to the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission at the scheduled January 7th meeting, with some aspects of the proposed rules being proposed for this winter 2021, while some will be proposed for 2022. The Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission is a governor's-appointed 9-member citizens board that oversees most of DMF regulations and advises the agency on matters concerning marine fisheries management. Proposed amendments to our regulations require majority approval of the commission. Back to the slide, you can see we are holding the hearing under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Chapter 130, Sections 217, 10, 17A, 80, and 104. And we are proposing amendments to the Code of Massachusetts Regulation at Chapters 6, 7, and 12. These draft regs are designed to reduce the risk of endangered whales becoming entangled in fixed fishing gear, and then reduce the potential harm posed by the fixed fishing gear if a right whale interacts with it. On that slide, you can see how to communicate with us. You can send it to my attention at the marine.fish@mass.gov email. All of the information about this can be found on our website. If you go to the mass.gov website and you type in DMF or DMF public hearings, you'll find everything that we're talking about tonight, including the draft regulations. Next slide, please. The virtual rules of engagement. The purpose of this hearing is to afford interested parties an opportunities to submit data, offer comments or arguments on specific amendments being proposed, or to offer how those proposed amendments can be changed to minimize the impact on those affected while achieving the goals. At the conclusion of this presentation, DMF will first accept clarifying questions regarding the proposals, and then once all the questions are addressed, we will invite public comment. I recommend you submit comments in writing to the agency. All correspondence will be shared with the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission in advance of their January 7th business meeting. The hearing will be recorded, and questions and comments are part of the public record. All members of the public will be muted through this meeting. To participate in the question and comment period at the end of the meeting, the public is required to use the raise hand function in your Zoom app. This will create a queue for questions and comments. Jared, on behalf of DMF, will recognize individuals when it's their turn to speak. And then you'll be unmuted for the duration of the question or comment. And when you want to make a comment, we would recommend you keep it to about 2 minutes per person. We do expect a lot of commenters, as we got last night as well. Follow-up comments may be allowed after all other persons have had an opportunity to speak. Next slide, please. Unlike last night's hearing, tonight we are disabling the chat function as it resulted in a back and forth among members of the public that wasn't fruitful, as well as too many questions for the staff to answer in real time. We simply couldn't keep up with what was happening in the chat function. So we are disabling it, which means you have to listen to, I guess, my voice, my presentation, and we want you to address the questions directly to us through that method. Participants must conduct themselves in a professional and courteous manner. individuals may be permanently muted or removed from the meeting based on their conduct. It's not necessary for you to comment during this hearing or register your concerns. Feel free to use this virtual hearing for informational purposes and then submit written comments later. As I mentioned earlier, you have until a week from Friday to provide us your comments. And as I mentioned, a recording of this and last night's hearing will be on our YouTube channel. Next slide, please. This slide I borrowed from the National Marine Fisheries Service. They presented it at a recent New England Fisheries Management Council meeting. I recommend anyone who's interested in that presentation to go to the New England Council's website. It was an outstanding presentation by NIMS officials. When I say NIMS, for those who are familiar with the jargon, it's the National Marine Fisheries Service, our federal partner. As you can see on the slide, much of the population growth of the last decade has been lost by elevated mortalities and reduced calves born each year. The right whale population estimate early last year, most recent estimate is only around 366 animals. They have been in decline since 2010, coinciding with an oceanographic regime shift resulting in reduced calves and changing right whale distribution, including movements of whales to more northern waters in Canada during the summer months, especially the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There was an unusual mortality event over the last few years, especially in 2017. In 2017, since then, we've had 32 mortalities and 14 additional serious injuries, likely resulting in death. Entanglement and vessel strikes continue to plague this species throughout the range. Where whales are being entangled always generates much debate and controversy because it's unusual to retrieve the entangling gear off the whale to successfully identify, source the gear back to a region, a fishery, or a person. But there have been some trends that have emerged in the last few years. One is whales have been shown to bear many scars that suggest entanglements continue to occur despite continued regulation changes. And in recent years, most of the entangling gears that we've seen on right whales are heavy rope, well in excess of half-inch diameter. Some of it's up to 3/4 inch. And that particular rope is not fished by inshore fleets and rarely fished by any fishermen within the Massachusetts state waters. Tonight's proposals attempt to address these issues by reducing the risk of entanglement, reducing the severity of the injury, and then help reveal, if possible, and possibly exonerate Mass state waters fishery through direct or indirect evidence about the source of the rope. Next slide, number 6, please. So DMF is reacting to the ongoing plight of right whales and the need to reduce the risk of serious injury and mortality from entanglements. But why now? Why are we here tonight in December of 2020? The timing of these proposals is affected by the take reduction team and the federal plan that flows from it. Last spring, a year ago spring, 2019, the take reduction team met, and this past spring in 2020, DMF submitted to the National Marine Fisheries Service proposals for Massachusetts fisheries, as did the other states in the Northeast. National Marine Fisheries Service is consolidating all of these proposals and are working on a proposed rule. We expect the final proposed rule to be out soon from the National Marine Fisheries Service, and we anticipate a final rule to be enacted by the end of May 2021. Concurrent with the National Marine Fisheries Service and the take reduction team deliberations is litigation filed against the Commonwealth of Mass to prevent takes of endangered species in state-mandated vertical buoy lines that are affixed to fishing gear such as traps, pots, and nets. The suit includes takes of endangered whales, notably right whales, as well as endangered leatherback turtles. However, these proposals only seek to minimize harm to right whales. DMF will address leatherback turtles takes in future rulemaking as we get closer to submitting the application to the National Marine Fisheries Service for the incidental take permit. The next 3 slides cover the proposals. Later in this presentation, I will provide details of our efforts to apply for an incidental take permit. Next slide, please. The summary of the of the closures include extending the February through April seasonal closure for lobster traps, which is north and east of Cape Cod, to include all waters under the jurisdiction of the Commonwealth. This would include adjusting the conch pot haul-out period from December 15th to April 14th to extending it through April 30th. Secondly is extend the existing January 1st through May 15th Gillnet closure in Cape Cod Bay to include those waters shoreward of the 7030 west longitude between 42 degrees north latitude off Gillnet Point and 4212 north latitude at Situate Harbor. And last, we are proposing a new closed season for buoy recreational lobster and crab trap gear. The closed season is proposed to run from just after Columbus Day, specifically the day after Columbus Day, as the holiday, so Tuesday following Columbus Day through the Friday preceding Memorial Day. At this time, I want to make a comment on issues that we've been receiving through correspondence and also through last night's hearing, and that is about ropeless fishing. We've received a number of written comments regarding ropeless fishing and recognize that there's a lot of interest in moving the fixed gear fisheries, especially the lobster fishery, toward that technology. However, there remain a number of questions about the functionality of transitioning toward this technology. Specifically, the Division of Marine Fisheries, National Marine Fisheries Service, and the NGOs and researchers are looking into this functionality of the tool, the cost of implementation, how to manage user group conflicts, particularly among trap fishermen, between mobile and fixed gear fishermen, when gear cannot be seen or identified at the surface. And then, of course, the enforcement of the trap and trawl features when gear cannot be readily hauled at the surface by environmental police. While not part of this public hearing, DMF does have existing regulatory authority to allow the setting of ropeless gear to investigate these critical questions. Next slide, please. The next slide is a summary of the gear modification proposals. We're proposing to require all commercial vertical buoy lines break when exposed to 1,700 pounds of tension. This may be accommodated by fishing buoy line that does have a featured breaking strength of 1,700 pounds, or by rigging the buoy line with a contrivance or multiple contrivances that allow for it to break at that pressure. The second is to require all vertical buoy lines affixed to commercial trap gear be fished with rope not greater than 3/8 inches diameter, and all vertical buoy lines fixed on recreational lobster gear to have a slightly smaller one at 5/16. And then finally, effective January 1st, 2022, we're proposing to prohibit the fishing of single lobster traps on board vessels with an overall length of 29 feet or greater. These vessels would be required to configure their traps as multiple pot trawls. Vessels with an overall length of less than 29 feet may continue to fish single lobster traps where authorized. Next slide, please. The summary of the other proposals, we're talking about capping the number of seasonal lobster permits annually at 150 in total. This would approximate the current level of fishing by student lobster permit holders and prevent any significant growth in this activity. In 2020, we issued 105 permits, for example. And note that student lobster permits are allowed to fish up to 25 traps and are subject to a season of June 15th through September 15th. This fishery is established in statute, or the permitting of this fishery is established in statute, but by regulations, we're proposing to cap it at a maximum of 150 per year. And the remaining 4 proposals fall into the realm of housekeeping and technical corrections, such as revising the language about the state's protected species regulations, consolidating the regulations that govern vessel interactions into one section, establish a consolidated section of maps, and then consolidate and refine all regulatory language as necessary to improve the clarity and the readability of existing regulations. The DMF staff is always working, in this regard. Whenever we modify the regs, we try to improve the overall readability of the regulation and make sure that whatever was written, whether it be 5, 10, in this case, some of this language goes back 25 years, is relevant to current conditions and current management schemes. I hope that if you have questions on the legal language, you'll avail yourself of the DMF website, where for this public hearing, all of the legal language is viewable. Next slide, please. The incidental take permit application is related to litigation. In January 2020, there was a citizen suit filed against the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, arguing that DMF licensing scheme and the regulation of the deployment of vertical buoy lines violates the Endangered Species Act, because vertical buoy lines may entangle endangered right whales and leatherback turtles. In April of 2020, the court ordered the Division of Marine Fisheries to apply to the federal agency of the National Marine Fisheries Service for an incidental take permit. The incidental take permit application has begun. It is quite involved. It requires extensive research and documentation of our fisheries. And one of the things that it does require is a habitat conservation plan. This plan demonstrates steps that the applicant, so that would be DMF, would be taking to minimize and mitigate the impacts that the activity is having on the endangered species. The proposed regulations make up the backbone of the HCP, the Habitat Conservation Plan for right whales. That's that which we are talking about tonight. This proposal does not address leatherback turtles. Leatherback turtle conservation measures will be proposed separately. The proposals that we are bringing forward tonight for right whales were vetted through the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Plan's rulemaking process and NOAA's Relative Risk Decision Tool. These are sophisticated models that incorporate whale presence along with the presence of fishing gear, and also incorporate relative complexity and riskiness of various gear types to devise a modeled outcome. If you do this and you do that, for example, will you meet your overall goal? Next slide, please. So this next slide actually describes the current closure as well as what we're proposing. The large pink zone is the current closure. It's called the Mass Bay Restricted Area under the federal regulations. Massachusetts has complementary rules that close the state waters portion of that, and we're proposing to extend that closure with the red striped, the deep red striped zone. That constitutes all the waters under the jurisdiction of the Commonwealth. We're proposing to extend this closure for the period of February through April. While it is true that the most likely location we expect right whales to be in the winter, spring, especially in March, April, and early May, it is in Cape Cod Bay. We have seen right whales in the Mass Bay area and east of Boston and off Cape Ann in some years, especially in April, when right whales are leaving the bay. The dentist aggregations are always in Cape Cod Bay. When we've seen at some times almost 2/3 of the population has been seen, during the season with peak observations in April. But when these aggregations disperse in April, whales can be seen elsewhere in adjacent waters as they move to points north and east in the spring. Over the past 5 years, some whales have lingered into early May, and DMF has kept Cape Cod Bay closed, and this will still be the plan. So let's go to the next slide, please. This next proposed closure, it's the striped red zone off of Plymouth up to about Scituate, and this is an area that has remained open since DMF's conservation program was enacted in 1997. It was west of the old critical habitat, and that old critical habitat that was established through the work of the Department of Coastal Studies, and it was enacted by the federal government as well as state government, is no longer a thing. The critical habitat has now been expanded to almost all the waters of the Gulf of Maine, and that is no longer a discrete critical habitat. So anyway, that particular area had been left open, and it came to our attention last year. There was some pretty strong presence of whales, but also some abandoned gear, and we noticed gillnet fishing in that area. and for consistency purposes and to again minimize the potential takes, we're proposing to include this area as well. Experience and survey results have shown that in some years, right whales do aggregate in that area, although not as common as the areas to the south and to the east. Next slide. The next is the proposal to create a closed season to buoyed trap fishing. It would not affect scuba diving for lobsters nor setting of traps in the Cape Cod Canal, where buoyed traps are already prohibited. Recreational trap fishing is already included in the existing Cape Cod area seasonal closure, just as commercial fishermen are excluded February through April and sometimes a little bit into May. But we've chosen we're proposing to close statewide the recreational fishery at some point in the fall and reopen in the spring. And tonight we're proposing it be the day after Columbus Day to the Friday before Memorial Day. It's painfully obvious to us when we go out and we try to pick up the abandoned gear that's left in Cape Cod Bay. About half of it has recreational tag numbers on it because the gear can be lost, it can be moved by storms. It typically is lighter, and probably those who fish recreationally are not as adept and as skilled as some of the commercial fishermen. And it happens. There's also a fair amount of turnover in the recreational fishery. So, but just as a quick description, despite issuing over 6,400 permits in 2020 with a 10 trap allowance, the overall contribution of traps fished is lower than might appear. Recreational trap fishing accounts for only about 5% of all lobster traps in state waters. We did a survey a few years ago. The average number of reported traps fished is around 7 per permit, not 10. And also many permit holders do not fish with traps. Many of them fish with scuba. Many permit holders report they did not fish. And so the last report when we tried to tabulate it, we determined there was about 20,000 traps in all of state waters, and much less than if you were to assume 6,400 permits times 10 traps. So only about a third of the potential is typically what we see in that fishery. So that's the proposal. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide, this has to do with a 1,700-pound breaking strength buoy line. This may be the most substantive proposal that we're bringing forth tonight to require commercial trap and pot fishermen to deploy vertical lines that part when subjected to 1,700 pounds of pressure. The recent study by the New England Aquarium researchers of entanglement records showed ropes with breaking strengths that are low can reduce the risk of serious injury and mortality. And one conclusion was fishing vertical lines with 1,700 pounds of breaking strength could reduce the risk of serious injury and mortality by at least 72%. Cooperative research with commercial fishermen have demonstrated that ropes of these breaking strengths are strong enough in most cases to allow the successful hauling of the gear. In essence, this research and the proposal tries to hit the sweet spot for a line type that is safe for the industry and beneficial for right whales. Mass Lobstermen's Association have received grants to obtain, distribute, and test rope prototypes that have normal diameters but lowered breaking strengths. Moreover, the South Shore Lobstermen's Association have developed a sleeve that can connect two portions of a cut rope and provide a consistent breaking strength to meet the regulation's goal. Next slide, please. As far as the proposed maximum buoy line diameter, again, we're proposing 3/8 inch diameter be a maximum diameter. While there is some variability in breaking strength for among ropes, we feel that by and large that is on the lower side of the range of all ropes. But more importantly, it is much more narrow rope than what is being fished in some of the offshore fisheries, including the Canadian fisheries. So we're also requiring recreational lobster fishermen to fish slightly smaller rope, 5/16. one of the biggest challenges is solving the dilemma of where entanglements are originating from. By making this rule, we feel that we can effectively rule out the mass state waters whenever a rope is seen with a diameter larger than what is allowed in the state fishery. It should be noted that amendments to the actual buoy line marking is not proposed in this rulemaking, but will be soon, probably later this spring or even this summer, once National Marine Fisheries Service final rules are proposed. The strong interest to have a distinct mark for each state's lobster fishery and possibly another mark identifying state versus federal waters fishing, because within each state there are some fishermen who can hail from a Massachusetts port, but fishing in the federal waters. So that's a complicated situation that we do hope to resolve quickly with the National Marine Fisheries Service. And we are sensitive to the fact that we're coming to that time of year where lobstermen would like to know what those rules will be so they can prepare the gear over the winter. And I pledge to you that we'll try to get that done as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. The single trap prohibition, we're proposing to prohibit commercial fishermen from using vessels larger than 29 feet to fish single traps. We're proposing this for 2022. This wouldn't apply to conch pots or fish pots in an exempted area. And it does not apply to vessels 29 feet or less fishing within an exempted area. The rationale is requires lobstermen fishing from larger platforms to trawl up, reducing the number of vertical lines in the water column, which means simply by going from one buoy per pot, if fishermen went to one buoy line to 2 pots, which is affectionately known as a double, or one buoy per 3 pots, a triple, that kind of gear configuration is much more common up in the state of Maine than it is here, but it would be an option for fishermen to remain small scale, but at the same time to reduce the overall number of vertical lines. And smaller vessels fishing inshore would still be allowed to fish single traps to promote fishermen's safety. So we're definitely cognizant of the safety issue. The map that you see on the slide is the location where single traps are allowed under the current rules. Just to be clear, about 5 years ago, there was a proposal to eliminate all single trap fishing, and we went back and we argued with the National Marine Fisheries Service and the take reduction team that this kind of an exemption for small boat near shore fishing should be allowed, especially because most of the gear is lightweight, and there wasn't a lot of evidence that lightweight gear close to shore was showing up in entanglements. Next slide, please. The seasonal lobster cap, the seasonal lobster permit cap, like I mentioned before, would effectively cap effort near the current levels, prevent the proliferation of fishing effort under this permit class, and thereby reduce the overall number of buoy lines fished by this permit class. We'll continue to allow young persons to gain commercial fishing experience and provide means for young fishermen to enter the fishery. Next is slide number 18, is just the last of the housekeeping measures. Again, I would urge anybody to take a look at the legal language we posted on our website, but it's primarily a lot of technical corrections and just clarification. Jared Silver of our staff does a very great job in maintaining our regulations and always looking to improve them. We work closely with the environmental police and also the fishermen to make sure that our rules are understandable, are clear and relevant. So that's the presentation for tonight. At this point, I think it would be most appropriate to go to the questions. So Jared, why don't you inform the public of what to do next about raising the hand?
Sure thing. So we're going to begin with questions. So if you have a comment, please save that for after the question period. This is just questions about the proposal, about the presentation, or any other points of clarification. So if you have a question, you can use the raise hand feature on Zoom. That will create a queue, and I will move through the queue to ask and call on folks. unmute them, allow them to ask their question, and then move on to the next individual. We will allow follow-up questions, so if you have a series of them, we'll take the time to get through them. So I'm now going to start with the individual whose username is Chromebook D052.
Jared, could you ask people to identify themselves, first name and last name?
Please. So once you've been unmuted, identify yourself with your first name and last name, and then proceed to your question. So user Chromebook.
Yeah, Jared, if someone's name is listed and you call them, I don't think they need to rename themselves, but in the case of Chromebook D052,
like this to feel comfortable talking. I need to sit up so I don't sound like crushed.
Chromebook D052, you're unmuted. Please proceed to your question.
I'm going to sit up. It's easier for me to talk.
Okay, Chromebook. Jared?
Okay, I'm moving on to the next person. I'll come back to Chromebook at the end. Olaf Operand, you have been unmuted.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, hi. I got probably just two questions. Have there ever been any entanglements of right whales or sea turtles found? I guess we're sticking to right whales today, north of the existing closed area?
I think you're asking about the origin of the gear. I mean, entangled whales can swim from.
No, that's not my question. Have any entanglements been found north of the existing closed area?
Yeah, and I'm going to correct you again, because I think what you mean is, have we identified an area north of the existing closed area as the source of an entanglement?
That was going to be my second question. My first question was, have you ever found an entanglement north of the existing closed area in state waters?
Oh, I believe so. Is Erin, are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm on. I can't think of any specific cases offhand, but entangled whales are often spotted in various places, but I can't think of a specific case where we spotted it on the North Shore or in Boston Harbor or Mass Bay.
Okay. And I guess my second question would be, so the answer is you're not aware of any entanglements being found north of the existing closed area?
Well, let me answer that. I mean, a whale that's found up on Jeffrey's Ledge or in the middle of the Gulf of Maine, or for that matter in Canadian waters, is north of the closed area. So
no, but in state waters though, just in state waters.
No, I can't think of any specific cases offhand.
Okay. And my second question would be, has any entangled whale found in Massachusetts waters been sourced to any state waters north of the existing closed area?
We've had two confirmed cases in the last 10 or 11 years in Massachusetts state gear. One was in 2009 and the other was in 2016, and they were both in Cape Cod Bay, essentially.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Olaf. Tom, you're recognized. You can unmute yourself.
Yep, I have a couple questions. Is the closure going to be like per area? Like, what I mean to say is, Southern New England, we haven't had any entanglements that I'm aware of. And if this closure goes on like beyond May 1st up in Cape Cod Bay, are we still going to be closed down even though there's no right whales in our area?
Tom, there's no proposal at this point to extend a closure where if whales aren't present. Also, as you mentioned, southern New England, this proposal is only for the state waters portion.
I understand that, but as of May 1st, if there's a whale up in Cape Cod Bay, are we still in southern New England going to be closed down in Area 2 state waters?
And I can add to that. In the past, when we have extended the closure, we have done that in discrete areas where the whales are present. I would presume that that trend would continue.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jared. Yeah, thank you.
All right. That being said, I understand that there will be lobsters left during the closure. Now, all of us, the whole state, is going to be taking these lobsters after May 1st. We down here usually have a good season, and you know this, between January through April. Now, when that season opens, there's going to be a glut of lobsters. Lower price, the whole 9 yards. Is there going to be any compensation for that? That we can, is there any, whether it be unemployment or anything?
Yeah, Tom, that's
consideration.
Yeah, that's beyond the scope of DMF's rulemaking. I wouldn't be able to comment on that, but that's certainly something if you want to make that as part of your comments, either later in this hearing or in writing, you're certainly welcome to recommend that.
All right. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. John Haviland, you're recognized.
No, thank you. This was a question that I raised last night, Jared, and that is that the current closure between state waters of Massachusetts and federal waters is 3,076 square nautical miles. And I posed a question last night of how many miles in total, if this passes on January 7th, how many miles will then be closed down? I don't know if you've had time to ascertain that area.
Bob, have you had an opportunity to look at that?
No, Jared, that's requires us to do a GIS analysis, which means we have to go into the office to do that. It'll take us a couple days to pull that data together and calculate that, but we will certainly, make sure it's posted with the rest of this information, what the exact square area is of the new closure, proposed closure.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. That's it.
Thanks, John. Greg Mataronis.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I had two questions. The NOAA risk reduction tool was mentioned as, this was vetted through that. And I'm just wondering, because I was a part of that TRT meeting, I was wondering the reduction percentage was for closing Buzzards Bay, just because I don't recall that being vetted, and certainly it could have been done since then. But, there was a lot of things done in that did not get a lot of credit, and they were pretty massive draconian things. So I'm just wondering, closing Buzzards Bay might actually accomplish in terms of risk reduction percentage according to that tool, if that's even available.
I'll take that, Dan. So Greg, yeah, so what this refers to is a lot of what's already been proposed was, as you indicated, been vetted through the model back through the original TRT process. Since that time, as part of developing the incidental take permit, process.
Okay. Yeah, I think you just went out there, Bob.
Bob, you broke up about 5 seconds ago.
Yeah.
As part of the process, you want to pick that up? Yeah, Bob, we've lost you.
Can you hear me?
We can now. You know what, Greg, we're going to get back to that answer for you. And maybe Bob can call in on his phone and view the video as well.
Okay. Yeah, and I had just another question too. You had mentioned that the recreational traps were only 5% of the commercial number of traps fished. And so just doing quick math based on the 6,400 and change recreational licenses issued at 60% report, 80% of that uses traps times 7, that comes up with 21,000 plus. And so I guess I'm just wondering, I didn't think that there was 430,000 commercial traps fished in Mass state waters as a whole. And maybe I'm wrong, but my argument for a long time has been how and I'm not against recreational fishing, but you've mentioned a lot of things about how they're not as adept. They don't follow the rules because a lot of times they don't know the rules, and ignorance is not necessarily an excuse or a reason. But so I'm thinking, at 21,000, that's more than 5% of the total commercial. But so I'm just looking for clarification on that, please.
Yeah, I'll go back and recalculate that, but I believe our number of traps in state waters is close to 400,000. But I'm going to ask Story Reed to pull up that. He's got a table he updates periodically, and maybe before the end of the meeting we can clarify that for you. But it's clearly a very small percentage of the overall number of traps. But I will clarify that for you and get you the best answer we can before this hearing's over.
All right, thank you.
K. Percy Bennett Nickerson.
Hey, yes, this is Percy Bennett Nickerson with Bennett Nickerson Environmental Consulting. And I have 3 questions. The first is, how far along are we, more in a timeline thought process than anything else, in the testing of the 1,700 pound breaking strength for purposes of like making sure it's ready for prime time and manufacturing it on the level that is necessary, both to be used in state and probably ultimately as a part of the suite of things that'll be implemented with the federal rule?
I'll start, and maybe Bob and Erin can fill in, but the original research was done, I think, in 2015, maybe 16, within Cape Cod Bay, and I think there's been repeated trials of that particular breaking strength, especially in the inshore fishery, as being sufficiently strong to retrieve the gear. So, the take reduction team hammered this out. Many of the fishermen who were involved with that, and some of them are on this call, were part of that cooperative research. So we're fairly confident about it.
And do you know anything about kind of how quickly it's being manufactured, and if it's going to be ready for time by the time this rule hits the books, or even the federal rule?
Yeah, well, we talk about contrivances or weak rope. I know the Mass Lobstermen's Association has ordered many coils of sort of prototype rope that would break at 1,700. But the other is the use of this sleeve that's produced by a company in Canada and distributed through the South Shore distributor. And that's the so-called sleeve that where you take you cut your rope and you put this sleeve over the 2 ends and hog ring the sleeve onto the rope, and sure enough, after repeated tests, the reproducibility of that 1,700 pounds was very consistent. That particular material is readily available. I know Bob was
Dan.
in communication today with the distributor. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, so the couple of things is, like Dan said, there are both Mass Lobstermen's Association as well as DMF has been purchasing coils of that rope. We just purchased an additional 400 coils of the 1,700 pound rope. MLA is also working with the manufacturer, as is representatives from National Marine Fisheries Service, to develop additional second versions of that rope. And also working with Nova Braid, we've purchased through a local distributor 4,000 of the sleeves that we'll be distributing to fishermen to work on. And local fish supply houses are also starting to get those in stock. And so, we're confident that the gear will be readily available by time of implementation to have, a set of both either weak rope and or contrivances that are approvable.
Okay, and then I guess my second question would be about the expansion of the mass restricted area seasonal closure. That closure is currently February 1 through April 30th, right?
Correct.
Is there any thought of including January in that, or is there any mechanism within the proposed rule that allows Mass to adjust those dates if for some reason whales seem to be there more often in January than originally predicted, or like changing temperatures or changing food sources, shift them out of the area in order to, just allow for some level of readjustment of the time frame of the closures?
Yeah, there is. I mean, we have the authority to condition permits. We have the opportunity to go back out for different rules. Massachusetts can be more restrictive, but the thing that is, I think it's important to recognize is most gear is out of the water after December 31st because January tends to be a very difficult month to fish in terms of wind and storms, et cetera. And I believe that 90% of the gear, or maybe 95% of the gear, is being pulled out well in advance of that February 1st deadline. No fisherman that I know waits until the 11th hour or the last couple of days of the month it goes to grab the gear. Most of that gear is taken out well in advance because of the challenges that the season represents.
And I'd also like to add to that response in that also, if you look at the sightings per unit effort data for the month of January, Massachusetts state waters has very low numbers of whales. Sometimes I've seen sightings map published and they're a little bit misleading because a lot of times with the sightings map, if they're not effort adjusted or adjusted for multiple sightings of the same whale, they kind of lend to folks to thinking that there's a lot of whales in January. But our sightings per unit effort in the month of January is extraordinarily low. It doesn't really that, and with a low preponderance of gear, the risk is extraordinarily low.
Thank you. Okay, and for my final question, when I'm assuming that on some level this proposal will be coupled with the TRT process federally, and is there any thought process to the fact that new population estimates have come out and somehow the assessment of what the risk reduction is might have to adjust in order to incorporate that new data?
Yeah, I'll take that, Dan. So ultimately, in addition to trying to achieve the metrics set forth by the take reduction team and National Marine Fisheries Service, the state of Massachusetts is involved in trying to successfully obtain an incidental take permit, which will require through evaluation that a negligible impact determination occur for our fishery. For that to happen, National Marine Fisheries Service will have to look at the risk posed by our fishery based on whatever the current population trajectory is. So ultimately, they'll kind of be the arbiter as to whether or not what we're proposing is sufficient to achieve that determination.
Is there any indication that they're incorporating the new data when making that determination?
It is my impression that they're legal.
Yeah, Bob, we lost you again. Bob, you still there? Yeah. Anyway, we'll get back to you on that. If that's your last question, I'd like to respond to Eric Mataronis's question earlier. And we've done some statistics. We found those tables, and in 2018 there were 17,000 traps fished by the rec fishery, and there was 292,000 commercially fished traps, which is about 5%. Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, give me a moment, please. Eric Knowles, you're recognized. Eric? Eric, you have to unmute yourself. All right, Eric, I'm going to come back to you. Bill Latch. Bill,
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can, Bill.
Yeah, hey, I just had a quick question for you guys. I do agree with a gentleman who spoke earlier that said there are a lot of recreational guys out there that don't know what they're doing, but there's some guys that were commercial guys that now are recreational fishermen like myself. So what can you explain the reasoning on the line diameters between the commercial and the recreational fishermen? I think the commercial guys were at 3/8 and the recreational guys are at 5/16. Because a lot of times we're fishing in the same areas, so I don't think a whale is going to know the difference between who's in the water. So I'm just curious why you lowered the recreation to the 5/16.
I think that has to do with the fact that the recreational fishery will still be allowed to fish trawls.
Singles.
Predominantly fish singles. Thanks, Jared. Whereas most of the commercial fishermen will be fishing trawls or doubles. But you're free to correct us, and once we get to the comment section, if you think that's a bad idea, we're all ears.
Okay. I mean, my only I guess comment on that too is most recreational guys are pulling by hand, and I know when you start getting those thin lines like that, it's very difficult. When the traps are so heavy to try and lift the traps with such a thin line. So
yeah,
that was only my comment on that.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Orally, Catherine Cormier.
Hello there. I'm not sure if anyone has asked this question before. I wasn't able to be here last evening or the beginning of tonight, but I was wondering, and I don't know what the laws are regarding international fishermen. How close to shore are they able to get? And would this apply to their fishing?
Yeah, I'll answer that. This is Dan. It's not lawful for any person from another country to fish in the federal waters, and to fish in state waters, you have to have a state permit, and also to obtain a state permit, you have to be a Mass resident.
Okay.
The state waters extends basically out 3 miles, but it does encompass all of Cape Cod Bay, which is 20 miles across. And out east of Boston, Mass Bay is about 12 miles from the shore, where the state federal waters line is.
Okay. And that leads me to my other question. I know this isn't so much about fisheries, but I know there's a lot of large cargo ships that are now coming into the Boston ports or surrounding ports. Are there any measures to regulate how they operate to try to decrease the strikes between the whales and the large cargo ships?
Yes, Aaron Burke, could you speak to the speed limits that National Marine Fisheries Service and Coast Guard have on vessels approaching the area?
Hi, so the feds have seasonal speed restriction areas for vessels over 65 feet in length to try to get at that problem. And they coincide those times with times when whales are in the area, and that's up and down the East Coast. And we have those zones in Massachusetts. And they also have alerts to mariners when whales are seen in the area. But as far as the only thing that we have control over, since the feds have already dealt with the larger vessels, are the smaller vessels. So we also have a small vessel speed restriction in place in Cape Cod Bay for vessels less than 65 feet in length.
Mhm. So with the speed restrictions, have you seen any strikes?
Since
What the current speed restrictions?
with the large vessel
With the
speed restriction?
large vessels, yeah.
Yes, there was a calf mortality, was that 2018? On the backside of the Cape in early May, I believe. But the vessel speed restrictions have dramatically reduced vessel strikes for right whales.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Mike Lane. Mike, you gotta unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Hey guys, what's going on? When and if we acquire the incidental take permit, what is going to happen to us if we do have an entanglement or, God forbid, a death?
Well, Mike, we haven't had a death that on the record or that we even are aware of, and the attributable to mass gear in the 25 years that I've worked here. And the expectation is that we won't, especially if we're going to this weaker line. We have had a couple of deaths attributable to ship strikes. That's pretty clear. We've had 2 carcasses in the last 4 or 5 years of right whales showing up on the beaches of Cape Cod. So I don't think you should dwell on that. I think you should assume that these particular rules are going to make it even safer for right whales, and that won't happen.
Is that a guarantee?
Well, I mean,
it's a concern, Dan.
Sure. No, I get it. I get it.
It's a concern because you know as well as I do what, if God forbid if something does happen,
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ann Walsh.
Hi, what are the hurdles to shifting over to ropeless fishing gear?
Well, I want to start and I'll have Bob finish. The hurdles are cost. It's extremely expensive. The second hurdle is locating the gear. If you put the gear down, you want to be able to communicate the presence of that gear to your fellow fishermen, whether it be a fellow lobsterman or a competing gear or a different gear like a dragger or a scalloper. So those are 2 major hurdles. Those are 2 of the biggest right now, and we feel that those have to be resolved before we move forward with a plan or a fisheries management scheme where the gear can't be seen. The reason vertical buoy lines are used is to mark the location of the gear so that the fishermen can retrieve the gear, but also so that others will respect the presence of that gear and not set over it or tow through it.
Okay, so how come other places are already able to use it? Like in California and other countries? Like how have they solved that? Because we could, we're spending a lot of time on different kind of rope and we could just jump to the thing that is least dangerous.
Sure, and you can make that,
invest money
that comment. You're welcome to make that comment in the comment section. But
how do those folks do that? I don't understand enough about the technology, but if somebody already knows how to do it, why are we saying?
That's an excellent question. And we have been granted a sizable grant to investigate those questions. We're hiring a contractor to study those fisheries around the world, but also interview fishermen as to what their local challenges are. So we hope to have those answers to you maybe in about a year.
Great, sooner the better. Thank you.
Okay, yep.
Eric Knowles. Eric, you gotta unmute yourself. All right, Eric, it seems like you're having some audio issues tonight. I'm going to follow up again towards the end with you. Michaela Morris.
Hi, my name is Michaela Morris, and I am an Oceans Associate with Environment Massachusetts. And my question relates a little bit to Anne's. And you did just mention the contractor that you hired, and I was just wondering if you could specify any additional plans that the Commonwealth has in place to continue exploring ropeless fishing technology.
So Dan,
yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I'll take a stab at it. So again, as Dan mentioned, we've been fully engaged through our protected species program. Aaron Burke and myself working with the Ropeless Consortium, attending those meetings, talking with those folks. And again, we received a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation specifically to look and address these issues. The comparisons that are made to other fisheries aren't necessarily applicable to the scale of the U.S. lobster fishery. The one that's commonly used is the New South Wales and Australia rock lobster fishery, which is a leased area fishery with a small number of participants who don't have competing mobile gear fisheries and a much higher profit margin per unit of haul. So it's not really applicable. Similarly, while it is an option for the West Coast Dungeness crab fishery to use ropeless gear in their closed area, based on conversations with folks out there, including with folks at California DNR or their marine fisheries equivalent, the wide-scale adoption of that has just not occurred. It has only occurred on a limited experimental basis, as has already occurred in Massachusetts. We have folks in Massachusetts. We've issued authorization letters for folks to test that gear, and that's continuing to happen and will continue to happen.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing more information.
Gilbert Brogan.
Thank you. Gib Brogan with Oceana. Looking at the incidental take permit application, it seems that the fisheries service is asking the DMF to specify the anticipated impact of the fishery on the listed species. Can you tell us what level of ESA take DMF is going to be estimating in the permit application?
No, that's not anything that we can specify at this time. I mean, that's an iterative process between us and the National Marine Fisheries Service. And so largely we're working with them to figure what steps are necessary to get to a level where they can issue us the permit. But those specifics have not been discussed or developed at this point.
Okay, great. And then just one other question. The incidental take permit application also asks for a detailed monitoring plan. Can you give us any information about the monitoring program that DMF is going to be proposing?
No, not at this time, only that we started to seek internal funding through state government to try to enhance this aerial surveillance that we already conduct in Cape Cod Bay to extend beyond that area into other portions of state water, and also looking to possibly, if we get the funding, or we'll have to get the funding, to initiate a sea turtle surveillance program in Nantucket Sound in the summertime. those are two of the things that we're currently considering and trying to integrate into the habitat conservation plan as part of our monitoring efforts.
That's good to know, and we'd like to support DMF in that effort to improve both of those programs. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Dan, just bear with me a moment. Garrett Laporto?
Dan, you got me?
Got you, Garrett.
Yeah, I just would wonder what the state would do if we all went ropeless and the first hurricane came through and every fisherman in the state called you up and said, I just lost 80% of my gear. It's all in a ball with everybody else's. Because that's what would happen. You know, that stuff would roll around, the buoys wouldn't pop. And I mean, we might save a couple whales, but then we're going to ruin the ocean floor.
Hey, Garrett, I think that falls into the comment realm. So if you want to make that comment later, but again, the ropeless is not one of the proposals, but I take your point, and I will add your name to the list of folks who might be interviewed by our contractor.
I just see a lot of people talking ropeless in this whole thing that really don't know what they're talking about. Because I mean, we fish a real nasty place, and that's, everybody knows that fishes fix gear. That's what would happen. All right.
Thank you, Garrett. Eric Knowles, I'm going to come back to you. Eric, can you unmute yourself? I think we're going with 3 strikes and you're out here. I'm going to go back to Chromebook D052. Do you still have a question? Okay, we have no more for Chromebook D052. I see a number of new hands being raised. Go to Dave McGee. Dave, you're muted.
Dan, how many right whale sightings have they had in the last 10 or 15 years in Buzzards Bay and Vineyard Sound?
Very
Hi.
few. Erin?
Yeah, this is Erin. I mean, we occasionally have animals, right whales peek in there, but not a lot.
So what is the, what are we gaining by closing those areas? Besides me losing 25% of my income.
Yeah, David, I suggest that you make that as a comment.
Sorry, Dan. I mean,
That's
I'm just,
okay.
you
But
know,
your first question's a good one, right? We don't have any known aggregations. There's no whales there on a predictable basis.
so how do we get any kind of credit for closing an area that doesn't have these whales in it?
Dan, I think this comes back to a question that was asked earlier that Bob's audio went out on regarding the risk reduction model and credit for the sounds in Buzzards Bay. So
Yeah,
maybe
so
that
we
would be a good time to come back to that.
Yeah, I can do that, and I think I have a better connection now. So, yeah, it's kind of complex, Dave. The risk reduction model, we haven't done specific ones that look specifically at what contribution closing Buzzards Bay and or Vineyard Sound. We don't have those numbers in front of us, but part of the issue isn't only dealing with calculated risk, but it's also potential risk. And albeit slight right now, we're kind of trying to essentially pass the test to do sufficient enough mitigation to be able to get our designation and get our incidental take permit. You know, but again, I would encourage, you know, you brought up a good question about the number of sightings, and you know, it's a worthwhile comment to note that in the comments portion of this. I'd recommend you do that.
Okay, thank you.
Robert McLean.
Yeah, hi. Listen, I just have a few questions. One, really a very quick technical question about the Zoom. As far as helping people who, you know, sort of understand things more visually, you just have the audio thing here, whether or not you can possibly get a tech guy to move your questions and comments on this. Do we just have one page we're staring at? Could you not have a map up of these proposed areas to the side, and also another portion of the screen where you could, I don't know, you know, post some things that are related to the conversation that'll keep people sort of more involved?
At this point, we don't have that ability now.
Just like a pointer on the map. Anyway, okay, that's one thing. All right, so here to my germane questions. You mentioned today, and it wasn't in the written commentary, which you were basically reading from. Sorry, I'm forgetting your name, director, right now, because I get nervous public speaking. But who besides the New England Aquarium were you getting feedback from on the 1,700-pound breaking ropes? And the second part of that question would be, who besides the New England Aquarium has weighed in on the net effects? This is if it happens, right? And we're all here because the fishermen want a job and need their work, but we also have a critically endangered species here that we haven't been doing well on. That's not a comment, it's a fact. And whether those net effects on baby and juveniles has been taken into consideration. And and third part of that question is, how can that be proven? You know, that's not going to hurt those babies and juveniles.
Okay, so this is Dan McKiernan, director. Well, I just want to say that the New England Aquarium study was a standalone piece of work where they sought to examine entangling gear and link it to degrees of injury and mortality. The New England Aquarium didn't propose this as a measure for Massachusetts. They just did that research 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
We worked with the National Marine Fisheries Service to come up with ways to reduce entanglement and serious injury risk by something like at least 60%. And this proposal actually goes a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
So Bob, do you want to?
Yeah, what I would add to that about the 1,700-pound line, Dan, is that in addition to that study basically informed the TRT process, where there was near consensus on which TRT, including the states from Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, and other members, was consensus on moving forward with universal adoption of 1,700-pound breaking string on fisheries. And I think so there was that consensus, and that group is a group of state and federal regulators, fishermen, environmental advocates, and a whole wide variety of folks.
That's good to hear. You know, it seems clear that Massachusetts, because and the concern voiced by some fishermen there in the previous questions, how can we best move forward toward what appears to be, you know, a model globally for, you know, sort of a universal standard on preventing injury, not just to you know, it's a question, but not pertain to this specifically, but to all marine life that gets tangled in ropes, you know, and then the clutter that I pick up on the beach constantly of ropes and traps. So, you know, how can we look forward to a more progressive platform for this and really get on the ball? Because I know you guys understand the issue. Those
are good questions. They're starting to border on rhetorical questions, and so I would ask that you put those into your comments. We're trying to answer technical questions on the range of options and the specific that we hear tonight.
I get it. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yep.
John Havlin, we're back to you.
Thank you, Jared, if you can hear me. Thank you. This is a follow-up question that Bob Glenn, I think, was talking about, and that is the aerial surveys. And January 7th, when the Massachusetts Fisheries Commission has a vote on this, and it's either passed or not passed. If it were to be passed and the closure is then in effect for all state waters, does the state have funding and or a schedule to do aerial surveys throughout all the state waters as they do in the density of Cape Cod Bay?
No, at this time, we do not have funding in hand to do aerial surveillance at the same density at Cape Cod Bay, but for simple presence absence, that wouldn't be necessary. That the high intensity of our surveillance in Cape Cod Bay is related to the fact that that's the largest aggregation of right whales in the world. And so, and that specific survey is used specifically for individual identification relative to population counts. And so, where we get information about whales that have been outside the Master Bay restricted area, we're already getting that from additional surveillance that National Marine Fisheries Service conducts, and also occasional forays when they have the time that CCS will do for us and fly about. But, moving forward, as part of our habitat conservation plan, we will have to enhance our surveillance in a state program, and that's something we need to develop and get the funding kind of hardwired to do long term. And that's what we're working on right now.
What's the feasibility of that, Bob, actually happening in such a short time? Because we're basically talking months as opposed to years to get, and funding seems to always dry up.
Sure. So in the short term, I think the surveillance that we currently have in place right now is good enough for simple presence absence, unlike that, high resolution stuff we do in the bay. But long term, we'll enhance that.
Okay, thank you.
Greg Mataronis.
Yeah, so I just had one more question. I'm wondering how much impact these public hearings might have on the proposals being discussed here. So, I mean, if it comes out that closing Buzzards Bay seems to be unreasonable based on negligible risk reduction, is that a possibility that something like that could be altered where an area is taken off the table, or is it just simply a broad brush approach and this is more of a notification to the fishing community? I'm just wondering about the effectiveness and of tuning into one of these. Thanks.
Well, I would say that we hold public hearings for a reason, and people should speak their minds, and we'll see where it takes us. But I mean, the Buzzards Bay portion of the fishery is pretty minimal these days, especially in the winter. So, but we'll see. But comment away. I mean, that's why we're here.
Yeah, and I'm obviously from Rhode Island. Buzzards Bay borders Rhode Island waters, and I fish with a lot of these guys, in particular on this call, Tom Tomkowitz and Dave McGee, and so I just trying to be in the same boat, I guess. So just wondering. I believe in public hearings. That's why I am part of the process. That's why I attend them. I just want to be sure that they're just not an absolute waste of time. That it's brought up that, or reminded, as you said, that they are held for a reason. So I thank you for that.
Okay, thanks. Jared, is it possible for us to move to comments and allow maybe people who might have a question to combine them?
And I have 5 more hands up, and I'm going to cut them off after this.
Okay.
So we have Rob Martin, Galaxy S10E, Lydia Vivanti, Garrett Laporto, and Percy Bennett Nickerson again. After that, after those 5 questions are asked, I'm going to call the question period and move to comments.
All right, thank you, Jared.
Rob Martin, you're recognized.
Yeah, mine's more of a comment, so you can hold me till later
All
on.
right, Rob, I'll put you back off and we'll go to comments in a bit. Galaxy S10e, can you please state your name and then provide your question? It looks like you have an audio issue. You can reach out to us via email and we'll try to get
Hello,
back.
can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yep.
Oh, thank you. Hold on, I need to, there we go. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm using my phone and not my computer because it wasn't working the other way. Anyway, you kind of answered a couple questions. I was curious just to
Could you state your name?
Oh, my name is Faye Anderson.
Thank you, Faye.
Someone had just recently said there is no right whale deaths in our Massachusetts waters in 25 years. Was that correctly stated?
No.
I'm sorry, excuse me?
We've had 3 known ship strikes around Massachusetts, and we believe they probably took place in Massachusetts state waters, but I don't think we can be sure, but it's likely. We've had 2 known entanglements in 11 years. Both were successfully disentangled by the Center for Coastal Studies, and that was one in 2009 and one in 2016.
I had meant to add entanglement, not including the strip, I can't say it, ship strikes. That's a lot of S's. My next question would be, if we have the gear out of the water, generally when the whales are present in our waters, and we're now adding the 1,700 pound breaking point, why go with the additional regulation changes to where everyone is now needing to be using trawl at this time?
The 2 known entanglements that I'd mentioned 4 and 11 years ago actually happened at a time of year when we didn't expect to see right whales. They were both happened in the month of September. And so it's the biggest risk of entanglement before we managed this fishery was probably in the winter, spring, because of the regulations. There's no gear there during the height of that season, so that risk approaches 0. But there is some minimal risk for right whales, at any time of the year when they might be meandering around looking, whatever they're looking for. I mean, these right whales do migrate. They're known to go from the Canadian Maritimes to the Mid-Atlantic in a matter of days. And so there is some low level of risk, and that's why as Bob had mentioned, the take reduction team came to consensus and sort of universally embraced the idea of fishing weaker rope for the purposes of further reducing the risk of serious injury should an entanglement occur.
Well, and that 2009 entanglement, I believe, was in a single.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I was told by fishermen that had been in meetings past with you when you originally were trying to go to trawl that it was proven that singles were not the trouble, and actually both entanglements were due to trawl, and that's why it was taken off the table a few years ago. Is that not true then?
That's accurate. No, that's accurate. And back, the metrics of where we were 2 years ago relative to that was prior to the most recent round of, that was more than 2 years ago, but it was in the most recent round of take reduction team rulemaking when NIMS came down and said we have to reduce risk by 60%. And so we responded to that. But in addition to that, as Dan mentioned in the early part of the public hearing, we're also, because we're being mandated by a federal judge to obtain an incidental take permit, to get a negligible impact determination, we're going to be held to a very high standard by National Marine Fisheries Service. So a lot of these additional measures are things that we feel are going to be necessary for us to successfully obtain the permit and hopefully allow our fishery to continue.
Okay. Another question would be, I know that a good amount of the state Outer Cape permit holders use singles, and we've built our business around that. Is there any consideration of allowing the people that have historically told you at the end of every year that they're majority fishing singles to stagger us getting to trawl, being that although you say 29 feet for a boat size, it really doesn't matter if we have a 40-foot boat if we've always been fishing singles. It definitely changed the game. It's going to cost us quite a bit of gear change, possible alterations to our boat. It limits us from being able to fish by ourselves. It will reduce our catch. It's most certainly more dangerous. Is there any possibility of an allowance of staggering those people or giving them more time to be able to achieve working with trawl?
I suggest you make that comment in the comment section and request that kind of a phase in.
Okay, I felt it was necessary to ask that question. Probably other single fishery people would, chime in on that maybe. Because it's a pretty important thing, because I know I do all the numbers with our business, and we spend upwards of $13,000 to $15,000 a year to get 100 traps and lines and buoys to work single trap only. And we've done that since we bought the business every year, basically. And now it's essentially going to be completely obsolete. And that is a big cost over just a few years.
All right, well, please bring that forward either in the comment section or put in writing to us as part of this process.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Lydia Vivanti.
Hi, good evening. This is Lydia Vivante from Wellfleet on Cape Cod. I came in a bit late, so I've always wondered about this, and I'm going to ask first, the 1,700 pound breaking string that you mentioned, what is that made out of? Is it nylon or some kind of plastic or?
So what is rope made out of?
Yeah, the breaking string you mentioned, the 17 pound breaking string.
Yes, generally, and I'm not a rope engineer, but generally, rope used in commercial fishing applications are a combination of polypropylene, polyesters, and probably other things that I'm not aware of, but certain.
Thank you. Yep. And then just part two of the question is, has there been any studies using hemp rope or hemp line, hemp string? I imagine that's what they used to use in fishing nets. I'm not even sure, but that material would biodegrade once it hits the ocean floor, as I'm sure a lot of the plastic or polypropylene.
Yeah, you make a good point. In the early years of the take reduction team, there was a lot of talk about moving the fishery back in time to degradable ropes, especially for long-term entanglements. But it didn't really catch much traction, but that's a comment that you're welcome to make.
I just want to also say that things have changed quite a lot now with, for instance, cannabis being legal in Massachusetts and many other states, maybe even being legalized on a national basis. It might be good to look back again at some of the degradable fibers, and hemp in particular.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Jared?
Garrett Laporta, you're back.
You guys hear me?
Sure can.
Yeah, Eric, I just talked to Eric Knowles and he was having problems with his computer. And this question is for Eric, from Eric to Dan. And back in Providence, Rhode Island in 2014 or 2015 at the AFMFC, the initial meeting with trawls, single traps, gillnet ends. What were the numbers with the trawls and the gillnet ends versus single and ship strikes?
Sorry, Garrett, I'm not able to understand the question. So, but you know what?
So what are the number of deaths is relative ship strikes versus entanglements? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the percentage with the entanglements, whether it was trawls and gillnets, single traps, and ship strikes with all the deaths. I got some rough numbers in my head, and trawl and gillnet ends were about 83%. Single traps were around 2%, and the rest were either unknown or ship strikes.
Yeah, I'm not sure where you're getting those numbers from, Garrett. Aaron, do you have any comments to make relative to the proportion of deaths in recent year that occur ship strikes versus entanglements, kind of on a broader scale?
Well, in federal waters south of the islands, there's been a number of entanglements over the last couple of years associated with the UME that haven't been able to be attributed to any specific fishery or area. The carcasses have been generally fairly decomposed. There's been a couple ship strikes down there a little closer to New York. Is there another way that you could frame the question? I want to, sort of drill down on what you're really trying to get at.
So back in 2014 or 2015, they wanted us to trawl up 100%. And we did not want to trawl up. And the numbers from that meeting were somewheres around 82% that trawls and gillnet ends to get a whale entangled. Single traps were about 2%. And the rest of the whatever happened to the whales was either unknown or a ship strike.
Yeah, Garrett, I think what Bob has described here is what we were dealing with in 2014, 15, and 16 changed in 17 when we had this rash of mortalities, and the pressure that we're all under in the current time period is much different than what we were facing then. So we made a good faith effort to retain the single trap fishery, and we'll continue to do that for the small boats. Because obviously we have safety as a concern. The proposal that we're coming up with is those with larger boats that are capable of putting more than one trap on the rail or on the boat. We're trying to move them into reducing their vertical lines. So I think the questions you're asking require a lot of research. I'm really ready to move into the comment section, and I know you must have an opinion about the proposals that we have. So I'd really ask you to have at it during the comment period or write to us your concerns.
All right. We have one last question. Percy Nickerson. I know that earlier when she had a question, she had a question about NIMS using new data that Bob cut out during. So I think we can address that now, as well as whatever follow-up question she's going to ask. Percy, you're recognized.
Well, I was going to ask, I was just wanting to get back to that issue. I mean, I know that this original process was based on the take reduction plan, and now there is a connection to the ongoing litigation as well for an ITP. But I was just interested as to whether or not the 60% reduction was going to be adjusted in relation to the new data.
So I can't speak to that because that would be up to National Marine Fisheries Service relative to their rulemaking, and their final rules haven't been proposed yet. What I do know is that through our incidental take permit application, to get a negligible impact determination, NIMS is obligated to use the most recent data and population trends. So they'll look at the risk posed by the Massachusetts lobster fishery, the mitigation that we're proposing, and the current population levels of whales, and from there make a determination as to whether or not they can issue a permit.
All right, Dan, we're going to transition to the comment period now. I'm going to go to Rob Martin first. So if you have a comment, please raise your hand. We'll accept your comment. Rob Martin, we're going to start with you.
Hi, I just wanted to comment on the 1,700-pound rope and reduced breaking strength. If anybody has any questions, go to Amy Knowlton's work in her recent studies. It'll give you all the working loads, what you're actually hauling on your ends. It's between 500 to 700 pounds. And the 72%, if you read through her paperwork, is the other 28% is newborn calves. And I'm pretty sure when they're up in our waters, they can break out a 1,700-pound rope. But I suggest people to look her work up along with Julie Vanderhoop on Woods Hole for drag on 1,700 pounds. And that's basically it.
Thank you, Rob. Gib Brogan.
Thank you. Gib Brogan with Oceana here in Massachusetts. I'd like to comment in favor of the time area management proposals that are in front of DMF right now. These will reduce risk to the right whales, reduce the number of vertical lines in the waters, and make Massachusetts waters safer for right whales. We support the action to extend the commercial trap pot closure to all state waters. Support the proposal to expand the size of the Gillnet closure in Cape Cod Bay, and question whether that should be expanded to bottom long lines that are deployed for more than a few hours. This was an issue that was raised in the hearing last night. And we particularly support the flexibility of DMF to extend the closures for a longer period of time if the whales are present. For the weak rope elements, this shouldn't be the foundation of right whale risk reduction in Massachusetts. It has some benefits to right whale adults, but the benefits for juveniles and calves is less so. Additionally, in the context of endangered species and an incidental take permit, it's important to note that the entanglement and breakaway event still counts as a take under the ESA, and that this needs to be quantified and considered in the context of the incidental take permit, that this shouldn't be the backbone of the program, maybe in the shoulder seasons, but not during the key part as the TRT put forward. And as far as ropeless goes, we understand that this is not an action for ropeless, but there are a number of housekeeping issues that are in this proposal, cleaning up the older regulations. And we'd encourage DMF to, wherever possible, use this as an opportunity to lay the foundation for future adoption of ropeless technology in these fisheries. If there are hurdles, regulatory hurdles, we encourage DMF to iron those out to the extent that they can, so that when ropeless is ready to go in the near future, that we won't have to deal with those hurdles. Thanks very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Michaela Morris.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Morris again, and I'm an Oceans Associate with Environment Massachusetts. And I am sharing comments tonight on behalf of our members, who are tens of thousands strong across the state, and through event attendance and petition signing and submitting letters to the editor, have really shown a commitment to preserving North Atlantic right whales. So I grew up in Massachusetts and also lifeguarded on Salisbury Beach, which is like 45 minutes north of Boston. And that grew a really strong respect and love for the ocean. And I think that is really shared by many across the state because we have so much beautiful coastline. And I see our North Atlantic right whales as embodying the ocean's strength, beauty, and resilience. And first, I really do want to thank the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries for drafting overall a really strong rule to protect this species and take a step towards prioritizing ocean health. In particular, I wanted to highlight some of the sections that we support very much. The sections that expand closures of all Massachusetts waters to fishing during certain critical points of the year, and also the vested power of the Commonwealth to extend these closures if necessary, we strongly support, and our members strongly support. And we see that as the kind of action that we need to save the species from extinction. So I want to thank you for including that in the rule. We also, in the same line of thinking that Gib just shared, would like to see some inclusion of language toward a pathway for the development and implementation of ropeless fishing gear, knowing that this might not be the correct channel for full adoption at this time, because we do know that the draft regulations, which have the 1700 pound breakable rope for fishing lines attached to trap pots, would still pose a threat to right whale calves and juveniles. But overall, I do want to thank you and just say that to keep our oceans clean and healthy, we really do want to strive to forge a culture that prioritizes the well-being of our ocean ecosystems, and that does begin with standing up for our most vulnerable species. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. Erica Fuller, you're recognized.
Thank you. This is Erica Fuller speaking on behalf of the Conservation Law Foundation. And first, I'd like to thank MassDMF for holding these hearings and for proposing additional measures to reduce entanglements in state waters. These proposed regulations are a big step in the right direction. Specifically, CLF supports extending the commercial trap pot closure to all state waters, expanding the size of the Gillnet closure in Cape Cod Bay to include Gurnett Point and Situate Harbor, retaining the authority to extend these two closures if whales are present, closing the recreational trap pot fishery between Columbus Day and Memorial Day, and prohibiting fishing with singles on vessels greater than 29 feet. In addition, we urge the state to extend the trap pot closure into the month of January and develop a trigger for additional closures when whales aggregate in state waters during times when there's not otherwise a closure, and to extend the vessel's speed restrictions that you already have to all state waters if that's the new closure. We do not support weak rope as a long-term solution. We note that the proposed regs codifying the requirements for a 1,700 pound contrivance and maximum buoy line diameters may reduce the number of adult North Atlantic right whale deaths. But unless this gear is cast off by a whale, it still impacts their reproductive success, and it is a take under the ESA. In addition, it affords little protection to other vulnerable marine species such as humpback whales, sea turtles, and young right whales. And finally, we specifically addressed the comments made during tonight's hearing and last night's hearing related to on-demand or ropeless fishing. While CLF fully supports on-demand fishing, the technology is still evolving and there are issues with gear conflicts that remain unresolved. Given that the Bay has the highest seasonal density of right whales in the world, we can't advocate for unrestricted use or expedited permitting until there's a larger conversation about the relative risks associated with such fishing in the Bay. And as an interim step, we recommend that MassDMF lead this conversation on next steps for on-demand fishing in your state waters, and strongly suggest that these conversations include input from regulators, fishermen, scientists, and conservationists. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Leah Baumwell.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yes, go ahead.
Great. My name is Leah Baumwell. I'm a senior associate with the Pew Charitable Trust based out of Boston. As you know, North Atlantic right whales are critically endangered, and we are encouraged that MassDMF has proactively proposed conservation measures to reduce risk in state waters, even in advance of rulemaking by NOAA. To that end, I just have a few points that I'd like to mention. We support the expansion of the seasonal trap gear closure from February 1st to April 20th. And we would encourage the division to consider allowing ropeless fishing in some new areas of the closure. As stated by the division during the hearing yesterday, one reason ropeless technologies is not proposed explicitly is because gear conflict remains a primary challenge. As you know, efforts are underway, including gear testing and a gear marking workshop to discuss and agree upon a universal method to mark buoyless gear and reduce gear conflict associated with ropeless fishing. So we encourage Massachusetts to continue to find ways to advance ropeless gear in and out of closed areas. We also support a new closed season for the recreational lobster and crab trap fishery from the Tuesday after Columbus Day to the Friday before Memorial Day. We support the expansion of the current Gillnet closure in Cape Cod Bay and believe this will reduce risk and entanglement of right whales in gillnets as they migrate in and out of the bay. We believe that 1,700-pound breaking strength and weekly contrivances, as the division calls them, require more testing before they are adopted throughout the fishery. We're concerned that weak rope doesn't provide enough risk reduction to justify the considerable effort that it will take to implement. We support maximum buoy line diameter restrictions, but believe more testing is necessary before limitations to the rope diameter are used to reduce risk. Rope diameter alone would be insufficient to reduce risk, and using line diameter restriction as part of the suite of overall protections, which is what the Mass state has offered or proposed, is preferred. As stated, the division during last night's hearings, someone said that the MLA are working with gear manufacturers to create a 1,700-pound rope that's unique in its look, so it's recognizable. We believe the division shouldn't rely on this, but require marking every 40 feet of rope, as well as vessel monitoring and trip reporting in all state waters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Leah. Juliana Hager.
My name is Juliana Hager. I'm a college student here in Massachusetts. And I just want to talk about how important I think it is that we take very proactive steps to save the whale, the North Atlantic right whale. Right now, scientists estimate that there's only 366 left, which means that there's fewer breeding age females than can give birth to calves to replenish the population. So it's very important that we don't lose any more of them. And the leading cause of death for these whales is entanglements. 85% of the population has been entangled at least once. Over half the population has been entangled twice. So as you can see, it's a very big problem. And I think that, well, DMF has done a great job. And I love a lot of the things you guys are thinking about. I think ropeless technology has been overlooked. It's been studied for over 20 years and implemented in places from California to Canada to Scotland. And it shows success rate of 98.4%. So I think that at this critical point with the technology that we have, it's important to invest in the future and find new and exciting ways to solve our problems. So I think the DMF in the state should consider changing the regulations to include ropeless fishing permit programs in the new draft. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana. Quinn O'Connor, you're up.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Quinn and I'm a student at Boston College. And growing up, I looked forward to visiting my cousins every year on the South Shore and our annual trips to the New England Aquarium. My older sister also went to Boston College and she is now in vet school and has inspired a lot of my love for animals. So I learned about the plight of the North Atlantic right whale last summer and was horrified. And not just the sheer number of whale deaths happening, but also the way the whales are dying, just being weighed down by fishing lines that cut into their skin, resulting in a slow and painful death. For the past 6 months, I have followed news concerning regulations, research, and death of right whales. And I can't understand how we have all this great new technology and are largely fishing in the same way people did in 1900. I'm disappointed that DMF omitted any mention of ropeless gear in its draft regulations. But now I am deeply disturbed in the way that the DMF has completely shut down the conversation about ropeless fishing gear, pushing it off to who knows when. I thought that this hearing's purpose was to listen to and consider public input. But yesterday, when people asked about ropeless gear technology in the chat, DMF officials disabled it, prohibiting the public from speaking. You asked us for our input, and we are telling you what we want. We want a way to use ropeless gear in Massachusetts. And I know that it takes time to develop and implement new technology, but I find it completely unacceptable to omit ropeless gear from this conversation. I hope you will listen to the people and include ropeless fishing gear, if not in these regulations, at least this conversation. Thank you.
Percy, you're up.
Hi, this is Percy Bennett Nickerson with Bennett Nickerson Environmental Consulting. And in large part, I would like to say that I think that Mass DMF has shown a real commitment to trying to find a way for the coexistence of right whales, other marine mammals, and even turtles. At some point, eventually, you guys are going to be discussing that as well in this situation, and fishing, and including gill nets and trap pot fishing. I'm encouraged by the expansion of the closures. I'm encouraged by the expansion of the gill net closure and the seasonal closure in Cape Cod Bay. And I think that these show a real commitment by Mass DMF, and think that, you know, that's reason for y'all to be applauded in your efforts. I do think that the heavy reliance on 1,700-pound breaking strength is complicated and flawed. I think that there's really no real way to test this in real time, whether for regular weighted whales or small whales or juvenile whales or whales that are already emaciated from other entanglements or whatever issue that you're dealing with. I think that there's deep concern about the heavy reliance on 1,700-pound breaking strength in this. And hand in hand with that comes the ability for Mass DMF to really look at ropeless as a real option. I do think that there needs to be a larger conversation about how that happens. I agree with earlier statements that Cape Cod Bay may not be the place to do this, considering the extensive population of whales that inhabit that on a fairly, pretty consistently from January until the end of April. But I do think maybe outside of some of those closures, there needs to be a larger, outside of the Cape Cod Bay area, there needs to be a larger conversation about where ropeless can be tested. If the main issue really is gear conflicts, I encourage Mass DMF to continue to look into the best way to fix that issue. I mean, it's been done in other places. There has to be a way through that process. I think that making sure that we have effective gear marking so that we know when it's inshore gear, when it's offshore gear, when it's US gear, when it's Canadian gear is important. I think it needs to be every 40 feet of rope, and that there needs to be really clear gear marking, real-time vessel monitoring and trip reporting that happens consistently. And yeah, I just hope that Mass DMF continues to look into the possibility of ropeless. I do think that given the advances in technology and the enthusiasm Mass DMF has shown so far in trying to make the fishery and the marine mammals coexist, I think that there's a solution.
Thank you, Percy. Greg, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I had a couple of comments on this. So I'd like to see if it's possible for that NOAA risk reduction tool to come up with the risk reduction percentage for Buzzards Bay specifically. You know, I just worry about this broad brush approach and then it being applied unilaterally in other things. So, you know, that risk reduction tool, it was sensitive to which tools, things that we did would actually help in risk reduction and which wouldn't. So there was large sections of the ocean that when we closed it down in that tool, it gave 1% benefit. And other areas like Cape Cod Bay, where it gave a massive benefit in terms of percentage risk reduction to the right whales. So that tool was developed at TRT 2 years ago. It wasn't vetted at the time. It's been peer reviewed since then. I'd like to see that tool used for its purposes and like this, so that way we know that there's not overreaching economic damage to the fishermen that are trying to make their living here. None of us want to see a whale get tangled. We're clearly here to be involved and hopefully help this situation, but at the same time, make sure that we can make our living, feed our families. There's no bigger environmental steward than a fisherman these days. We recognize the plight of the environment, how the health of the environment is what allows us to make a living year after year. So we'd like to see the right whales flourish and come back. But at the same time, we do have this tool that I think should be used in this situation. A couple other things. So when you talk about these large area closures, you might be looking at displacement of a lot of fishermen, and they could go, some of them have federal permits. They can go out in federal waters. And so I happen to fish sometimes along the Massachusetts state line, depending on the season. And these guys that fish in Buzzards Bay and down by me, they're going to have to go out there. Now, I don't wish that upon them, because I'm sitting looking across the invisible fence knowing that they are catching lobsters because it's earlier there, and they're going to have to come out and share what little is out there for me. At that time of the year, there's a few spots that you can go and make a living, and more gear on top of me or me being there on top of them, it's just going to split the small pie even more. And, I like what I do. There's small margins, but that's okay, because I chose this profession. It's just death by 1,000 paper cuts is really starting to catch up. And if I have these guys, we're all professionals coming down to share the same lobsters that I'm catching, it's going to impact all of us. And so I worry about displacement of fishermen. And then on top of that, you've got the fencing effect. I recognize that this is a possible way to help right whales, but if you're going to push gear into areas that may be more detrimental to right whales, I just don't see the sense of it. So, and maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot by saying that, but it seems to me that if there's not a real big need to close some of these areas and allow guys to fish there, and there's very, very minimal to low impact, as we've heard, no recorded deaths in 25 years in Buzzards Bay, I think that's what was said, then what's the sense in doing it, I guess is my, and I recognize that it has to, a lot of this is because of the lawsuits and pressure from that side. And it was the same with TRT. We were, I don't want to say threatened on a daily basis, but we were reminded that we needed to come up with something. And I think as a whole, we did the best we could. And some of this in here wasn't discussed there. Obviously it's new, and we're already, unfortunately, 2 years away from that, or a year and a half. And then in terms of ropeless, I know that's not part of this, but everybody else is commenting on it. So I'd like to frame this as more hurdles that need to be overcome, because it keeps being said that the gear identification and gear conflicts are the major hurdle, when probably a bigger hurdle is the cost. And it's the cost per unit, it's the cost of maintenance, and then it's the cost in the lack of efficiency that will be introduced into my business. So right now I can go out and haul 600 traps in a day efficiently, but with ropeless, I'm confident that will be cut at least in half. Like I said, we're working on thin margins, and that's okay. We chose to do this, but we can't have them be stripped even more to the bone. Lobster prices have been stagnant. All other costs have been rising, and now you're gonna, traps are super expensive, and now you're gonna add something that per end is gonna, I don't even know, make the cost of a single trawl tenfold of what it is. So that needs to be worked on. also the safety factor. So there's been many instances where a deckhand or somebody gets their foot caught in the line in a trawl and they go overboard, and the captain is able to spin around and grab the buoy and haul the guy up. And there's been many instances where the guy has lived because of that. And so what's going to happen with this pop-up technology is that is a guaranteed death sentence for that person. They're not going to live because of the time it takes. It takes seconds to gaff a buoy and haul them up because we know what we're doing. But in terms of having that, hydrophone acoustically connect to something that's most likely still going to be moving on the way down, and then hopefully it's not entangled. Hopefully it's not too rough to see the pop-up buoy quickly. So people are going to lose their lives with this technology. And I just don't think that is a fair way to, this ropeless is being talked about as if it's the solution to everything. But what it's going to be is going to be the end of the fixed gear fishermen is what it's going to be. And maybe that's some people's agenda, but I personally would not like to see that. And I know that DMF would not like to see that. So I just don't, in terms of hurdles, that needs to be worked on as well, along with everything else that's been mentioned. Gear conflicts, I mean, that is a big one, but the safety factor is massive to me. And then the final thing is, we have these wind farms coming, and if people want to talk about saving the right whales, they need to get on these public forums for wind farms. I'm sorry for mentioning that, but it's a double standard to be going after the fishermen and then letting these foreign wind farm companies come in here and do whatever they want with self-policing. They hire the observers, they train the observers, they self-report. And guess what? They're crushing everything out there. They're crushing the environment. They're ruining it. And then once these turbines are installed and the Calanus is crushed for a couple of years and the right whales don't come back, well, then all of this is a moot point and everybody will be gone. But the bottom line is there needs to be more. They're speaking up from the environmentalists about the wind farms. I attend these meetings weekly about this, and it appears that the fishermen are the only ones that actually care about the whales and the environment when it comes to these wind farms. Thank you.
Faith?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. Go right ahead.
Great. I know that this isn't about ropeless, but it's been painful to listen to repeatedly. I would like to invite any of I guess it was mostly women talking this evening and last night as well, to come fishing with us and see what it looks like with all of our traps everywhere, littered with gear. And even if it was trawl and we had less lines, we are still on top of each other. I'd like for them to come experience that, then sit off ocean and appreciate the ocean, but not actually experience how we work, and to think about the options of making sure there's a free insurance policy that's coming with this gear in some way or another, because when we drop our traps over the side, they're gone possibly with the fact that we have no tether to the surface that could definitely be catching them back up. That was my main comment.
Okay, thank you, Faith.
Thank you.
Robert McLean? Oh, sorry, Robert, you're unmuted now.
That's okay. Thank you, Jared. Hey, listen, I wanted to thank Dan, Kiernan, and Bob for you guys' work and doing this. It's a complicated issue, and then realize that a lot of non-fishermen don't understand the challenges. I completely did not understand the last person's comment, a little bit convoluted. But as far as ropeless fishing goes, it's clear that obviously, if we look back at just the name of our area, I'm living on the vineyard. I'm happy to see that you guys put in the vineyard sound there. around the island as a closed area proposed. Because I remember one year, like about 20 years ago, when I was coming over and the captain of the steamship authority said, "Hey, look out your port bow, there's a right whale." And, you know, it's just as in the way Cape Cod Bay was named Cape Cod, you know, where's the cod, you know? I mean, the question is do we want to let technology pass us by in other countries, or do we want to grab all of it? And pursuant to that, I actually had another question I didn't quite get around to asking, which is the, you may not answer it now, or you may, which is the, in addition to these closures and, you know, the fact that ropeless is too expensive currently, and there is and will be funding for it greater once we realize that there could be technology for the fishermen, lobster fishermen, actually having a count or an indication of the fact that there is products, let's put it that way, in those gears that are out there remotely, you know, in terms of being able to detect that. But my question, it really is to you and to think about for the future, is the technology aboard ships in terms of it, they're, you know, these sensors, you know, technology's come so far. We got to be able to avert these ship strikes. And that, I think that goes hand in hand with the evolving technology for fishing and trap fishing. And as far as ropes, well, we know plastic is a huge problem in the ocean. So that has got to be solved. I want to thank you all for your being here and you're having this for the public. And that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Beth Cassoni, it's your turn.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
I can, Beth.
Good evening. Thank you, Dan, Bob, Jared, and Erin for all your information tonight. I'm still learning. Beth Cassoni, Executive Director for the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association. We will be submitting a formal letter of comment, but I have to comment on ropeless fishing. The Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association delegates voted last week and this week to reaffirm the position that we do not support ropeless fishing. The costs are exorbitant. They are cost prohibitive. We've heard upwards of $150 million to outfit the industry for the first year, and that's without any gear loss. The lobster fishery generates right around $90 million a year ex vessel, and to think that this is prime time shelf, off the shelf ready is unrealistic. You know, the MLA did test ropeless 4 years ago, and the time it added on to the day was about 30%. And looking at a closure for 3 months, actually a 5-month closure, now you're going to add a loss of 30% of time. The numbers don't add up. And I respect everyone's comments and opinions, but ropeless is not real. It is not prime time ready. And the previous fisherman that commented about the fatalities, that's a real concern. So when does the human life become less important? And that is the number one priority. Fishermen go fishing and they are to come home. So I just wanted to put that on the record tonight, and we will submit our comments later on next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Michael J. Moore, you're up. Michael, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I got that. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, my concern is that the extent to which these changes go will be insufficient to make it work for the industry in the long term. And therefore, once again, there will be gear modification, in this case, weak rope, that will have some impact, but insufficient. And that'll come back to bite the industry when they are once again asked to do more down the road. So essentially, ending mortality, assuming the weak rope does that, will not reduce the sublethal trauma from weak rope, which will continue to limit the calf production. And without the recovery, then you're still not going to deal with this problem. So this is a half-baked, half-directed solution. And as a result of that, you're going to see further regulatory trauma on the industry. And that's what really worries me, is I hear the pain tonight. It's huge, and I totally respect that. But I don't see this as a solution that will let everybody go fishing where they want to go fishing, when they want to go fishing. And that's what we've got to achieve if this very intractable problem is dealt with. And so, yeah, obviously what I'm talking about is, you know, that expensive, dangerous piece that we've been talking about tonight. And inefficient. We've got to get it affordable, we've got to get it safe, and we've got to get it efficient. But taking the rope out of the water column has to be a goal for not only Massachusetts, but Maine, offshore, and Canada. And once we've done that, I sincerely believe that people can get on with their business and start having to talk about whales in the Lobster Forum and vice versa. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Mike Lane, you're up.
All right. Yeah, Mike Lane, commercial lobsterman in Massachusetts, and I just want to go on record saying, you know, obviously I'm against further closures. Here again, we have the guys who are innocent being put in jail again. We all know what size rope is hurting these whales. We know where the ropes are coming from. There's been no entanglements that have occurred in the last 7 years for our closure. So extending the closure, we know really is not going to help these whales. The reduced breaking strength, that is a published paper. That is pure science. For these people who believe that reduced breaking strength is not going to help or it's not going to work, it's published science. You're affecting real families with these closures. I mean, you know, myself, young family, we have bills like the rest of you. And it's not just us. You know, we have lobster dealers, we have baitmen. There's so much that goes along with the fishing industry. And to continue harming the guys in Massachusetts who have led the way for the last 10 years just seems like, you're targeting the wrong people. It just seems a shame to me that, you know, somehow we keep getting our knees taken out from underneath us while the rest of the ocean runs free, continue doing what they're doing. This has to come to an end at some point. I have to be able to run a business. I have to be able to make capital investments and not continue to lose sleep over where my next paycheck is going to come from. These are real problems that my family faces. It has to be solved. One of these days in the future, it has to be solved. We can't keep doing this. We go round and round and round, year after year after year. Massachusetts, we've made reduced breaking strength rope. We're working on ropeless fishing. I don't know how much more we can do for you people. Lawsuits are not solving the problem. So, I don't know. Frustrated fishermen. Thank you.
Garrett?
Got me?
I got you, Garrett.
I just think it's unfortunate, you know, like goes along with the last guy, you know, being fishermen, we're the weakest link with this whole whale thing. And unfortunately, the weakest link is always the one that gets attacked first. I mean, you don't see these people attacking Maersk or any of those big transocean shipping companies. I mean, those companies got more money than God. I mean, fact.
Gary, you lost your audio. If you have another comment, I'll come back to you at the end. I see 2 new hands up, and I'm going to go back and take comments from repeat customers. I'm going to go to the iPhone account.
Hi, this is Patrick Ramage from IFA. Thank you, Dan, Bob, Aaron, and all for the time last night and this evening. Much appreciated, and appreciate the good faith efforts to identify some solutions here. I guess just I was struck both last night and this evening by the number of comments regarding ropeless, including from lobstermen, who are helping to pioneer this technology and working with tech companies, researchers, NGOs like IFA and others to do that. Without denigrating any of the good efforts of DMF and my state officials on this, it does seem to be yet another example where the private sector is moving well ahead of government on this, and in that context, Quinn earlier called it the student Quinn called it unacceptable, the extent to which ropeless had kind of been glaringly left out, both of the proposed regulations and sort of cordoned off from the substance of a lot of tonight's discussion. And to dismiss it last night as not ready for prime time, coming from not someone representing hardworking lobstermen, but from a state official who is obliged ultimately to reconcile some of these things and has an obligation to, protect the fishery and these jobs for the long term, was very striking. And so was the silence when a fisherman asked, okay, well, what's going to happen then when there's an entanglement? And, hopeful wishing isn't a sufficient answer. So I would just say, from our perspective, we welcome these efforts. We welcome the opportunity for ourselves and other stakeholders, first and foremost, the fishermen, to speak to this. But some things are not either or, they are both and just using the blunt instrument of closures and giving, what really doesn't seem to be much more than lip service, relatively speaking, to a technology that seems to hold promise for removing this threat. We all have a responsibility for our actions. We should be a lot more focused on how can we make that technology and other technologies that remove the threat and allow fishermen to keep access to fishing grounds. How can we be accelerating that? How can we be helping fishermen afford it? We cannot get to that new technology in the water by just putting it on the backs of fishermen. So I think we should all be expecting more from both, while grateful for your service and efforts, from both state and federal officials that are looking at this problem. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Again, I didn't prepare comments because I wasn't going to speak till I heard Mike Lane as a frustrated fisherman sharing that. And I think we can all lift our sights a little bit and do a little bit better here, each in our respective roles. Thanks.
Chuck Gilchrist.
Yeah, I appreciate what Mike said with regards to some of the frustrations. I work with Novatech Braids, and through our cooperation with South Shore Lobstermen's Association, helped to devise the South Shore link, the breakaway link. That whole project started 5 years ago. I scratch my head and wonder, would we be in a better place right now if we had adopted the use of those breakaway links in Northeast waters if we would have seen some reduction of the number of fatalities of the right whales. I applaud the fact that DMF is actually now starting to say, yes, let's propose using the links, let's propose using a 1,700 pound break strength rope, because we've got to do something. And right now, all we've done about this is done more studies and had more discussions and more studies and more discussions and spend money on that, but we're not actually putting anything out that's actually going to even marginally reduce the danger to the whales and also allow the fishermen to continue to make their livelihood. There's a lot of talk about the ropeless stuff. That's great. I think that's a wonderful technology, but the money's not there to implement it. And we can't tell the fishermen, you have to use ropeless gear right now because they can't afford it. And like the last gentleman said, unless there's federal and state funding that will actually assist these technology developments, it is going to be a slow process. It's taken 5 years for DMF to say, okay, we need to have 1,700 pound break strength rope. 5 years. So, and I just also want to speak to the person who was asking about hemp rope. Again, I would encourage them to look at Amy Knowlton and Scott Krause's work with regards to reduced strength rope and what technology has been utilized over the last 10 years. And the hemp rope in many cases is going to be stronger than the polysteel rope that has been utilized in the past with a 3,300 pound break strength. And I don't think that hemp rope is going to be solving any problems with regards to reduced entanglements. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Joel, you're up.
Yes, hi. My name is Joel Cohen. I'm really just a regular concerned citizen listening to all this. I have gotten a lot more involved in this in the last year. But I wanted to say I appreciate the proposed regulations. I understand it's difficult, really difficult on the fishers. However, we've just gone through 4 years of just one species, the North Atlantic right whale, severely declining, having a high mortality rate and event rather, and something has to be done. I know personally, I gave up seafood. I'm 45 years old. I've lived on the ocean my whole life. I love the ocean. I love seafood. I love business. I love fishermen. I have friends that fish commercial, and we all fish recreationally. And all those, we all love the ocean. We love all the animals in it. But I personally cannot stomach another whale getting entangled or dying. We know it's going to happen. The numbers, the way it does happen, it's going to happen. And the way I look at this is, again, I appreciate these regulations, and we've got to do something together. The fishers have got to be involved. I hate that we're going to damage economies and families and all that. It's absolutely horrendous, but at the end of the day, it's a species that's been here longer than us, and I can't believe we've killed this many, and we've got to find a better way. Ropeless, I've actually volunteered and work with a group called Sustainable Seas Technology. We work directly with fishermen on commercial fishers' boats with this gear. We spent a lot of the summer and winter testing this gear. I find some of the comments, one of them about deaths and that stuff's, unless there's some kind of proof or information, or I'd really like to see that, because that's a major comment that's that's, to me, it's way overboard. I've worked with the gear. I'm not a commercial fisherman. I work with commercial fishermen. They learn in 5 minutes. They're smarter than, they're super smart, and they taught me so much, and they adapt the gear to work to their system. So the gear is very close. And if these regulations go into play, it seems to me there's 1 year left to get this last mile of ropeless working. Ropeless is real. It does work. It's used in many places. Now to get it to this last mile, to get it efficient, to get it cost effective, all that stuff. We've got 1 year left basically, or more fishers will go out of business. So anyway, thank you very much.
Regina?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name is Regina Esmita Silvia. I'm the Executive Director for Whale and Dolphin Conservation, and I just want to thank the state for always managing to walk the line between ensuring their fisheries can be productive as well as protecting North Atlantic right whales. We're very supportive of the measures that are put forward and deeply appreciate the fact that the closure is a place where right whales are going to be safe. The addition of ropeless, which has been mentioned many times tonight, would actually at this point increase risk, in part not only to right whales by adding gear, but also agreeing with many of the fishermen who have expressed some concern as it is not ready to be put out commercially at this point. I would like to echo the comments made earlier by Erica Fuller to encourage the state to lead a conversation and include fishermen, conservationists, the state and federal agencies, and other appropriate party engineers to move that conversation forward, but acknowledging the fact that is something that has to be done in the future. We have expressed concerns previously about 1,700-pound breaking strength line. The paper is scientifically vetted, but the data are prior to 2010, before right whales had changed their habitat significantly. And the paper itself indicates that whales that are under 2 years old are not likely to survive even in lower breaking strength gear. Some additional data coming out indicates that right whales are probably growing a little bit more slowly, and that age parameter may be a little bit different. However, having said that, we appreciate the fact that 1,700-pound requirement would be outside of the closure time and actually reduce risk by ensuring that risk can't increase in Massachusetts waters. So we appreciate that as well. And as well as the vertical buoy line diameter maximum of 3/8 that's being put on there, which is pretty comparable from what I understand of what's being used now. So it would not be a burden to the fishermen, but would ensure that risk wasn't increased. So again, I applaud the state for the work that it's done and continues to do to ensure that the fisheries thrive as well as the right whales get protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. Kay Sawicki.
Hi, thanks. My name's Kim Sawicki, and I just have a few comments to some of the concerns expressed this evening about ropeless technology. Of the 13 ropeless technologies that are currently available, I've personally fished with 11 of them in 4 different countries in 7 different pot or trap fisheries with dozens of fishermen. The gear's been completely safe once it's adopted and fishers learn how they want to use it on their individual boats. They fish them just as fast as traditional gear. Ropeless is real. It just keeps getting better with input from our fishing partners. I always welcome invitations fishing to share these gears with anyone who wants to learn about them. But really, we learn more from our partners really to how we can best adapt these gears and help keep fishing families working. That's really what we're all about. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. Allison Ludke.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, Allison.
Hi, thanks so much. My name's Allison, and I'm a policy advisor for the Animal Welfare Institute and also a lifelong Massachusetts resident. I'd like to say first, thank you to MassDMF for holding this hearing. On behalf of the Animal Welfare Institute, we appreciate the stepping stone of these proposed regulations and support several, including extended closures for trap fisheries in all Massachusetts waters, DMF retaining the ability to extend these closures based on right whale sightings, and a new closed season for the buoyed recreational lobster and crab trap fisheries. We, like many other groups, would like to echo the concern and push for ropeless gear for reasons already mentioned. Regardless of if weak rope is used or not, entanglements of any kind pose risks to whales, and as mentioned, affect the ability of the species to ultimately recover. Removing rope from the water is the only way to ensure entanglements don't happen. This requires research, investment, and funding from both state and federal governments. Time is running out to save this species, to adapt this industry, and ultimately to find a way both can coexist. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Dave McGee.
Hello.
Hi, David.
I'm just having a hard time about this whole thing. I mean, there is a lot of money available with all these environmental groups, all these whale groups. Have they come up with anything about a buyback for the fishermen just to get rid of us? I mean, I think it would be a good thing. I mean, if you can get rid of 75% of the fishermen, you have a lot less people that you have to worry about, you know, getting rid of the lines and all this other stuff. It's just, I mean, I've been fishing my whole life, and it's just, it's coming to the point where I'm not going to be able to make a living anymore. I mean, it's just like we're dying by slow death. I mean, it's just awful. I mean, there's so much money available. I don't understand. I mean, these environmental groups have millions and billions of dollars. Why don't they put their money to buying the fishermen out? I'm just bringing that up. I don't know whether it's something that's viable or not, but something that should be thought about.
Thank you, David. All right, I have a couple more folks who are repeat. Before I go to them, please keep the comments focused on the remaining comments. If we're going back to keep them focused on the proposals when we wrap up. If you have additional concerns you want to explore, additional ideas, concerns, or other things that you want to express to us that fall outside of this proposal, please reach out to us directly and we can discuss those with you. So with that, I am going to go to Rob Martin. Rob, you're up.
Thank you, Jarrett. Rob Martin. And I just want to say, well, I'm going to first address a couple comments I heard earlier about every 40 feet for gear markings. I just want to, if you're talking a gear marking or a reduced break, a controlled break. When we developed the South Shore sleeve 6 years ago now, we put them in every 40 feet using best available science for the length and circumference of a whale in on drag. When we came out with it, everybody thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. I've been personally using those for 5 years now, have gotten zero credit along with numerous other members in the association. I am also working on acoustics for the last 4 years, fishing it, testing it 2 years. The people who are pushing the acoustic equipment to go into the fisheries, now that we can try to get back in, like I said, I am on my 7th year of a closure coming up. That's 21 months, 35 months on a month each end. I would want those people not to get a paycheck for that amount of time. We're trying to get back into certain areas with low density of right whales. These are the same people who are pushing this equipment. We're trying to solve a problem. And that's all I have to say. Frustrated fisherman number 2 after Mike.
Thank you, Rob. The last comment, we're going to go to Gary Laporto, and then we're going to conclude the meeting. Gary, you're up. Garrett?
Hey, I just wanted to thank everybody tonight Beth's comment really kind of made my night earlier. And all these people that test this ropeless stuff, I think to even entertain that thought, they take a couple wraps before the north end and hop over and see what happens. Because when somebody's not there to pull you back in, it's no joke. Like everybody in my fleet knows, if it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't be speaking right now.
Okay, well, Dan, back to you.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. We had probably half the attendance tonight we did last night, but I think we had some really strong comments on the proposals, and I want to thank everybody for attending and being constructive. Like I mentioned earlier, the comment period remains open from a week from Friday, so please put your comments in writing. It's the best way to share those directly with our commission. And I wish everyone a good night and be safe. And I'm sure we'll be having future meetings, especially about some of the ropeless issues as we get into the development of the investigation based on that grant that we had mentioned earlier. So thank you, everyone, for attending.